And first they said it's April, then they said it's June, then they said it's July. Now it's November. And they promised me that I would not spend another winter out here. And I'm waiting for that building up at 16th and Dunbar to be completed. And first they said it's April, then they said it's June, then they said it's July. Now it's November. And they promised me that I would not spend another winter out here. Yeah, it's BC Housing. That's right.
Do you know why temporary shelters are constantly being built, but the number of homeless people on the streets doesn't decrease? Because there's a problem inside.
The waiting lists are a long time for when you're on a street, right?
I need a bed now,
Yeah.
and they give you a bed in 3 weeks' time.
Oh,
That's not
okay.
going to happen.
Or yeah, I don't have a bed at the shelter. It's too full. Just one place, and then the other two places they only have like eight beds each in them.
Are you staying in shelters then for now?
Yeah, I
or-
am for now. I've been staying with a friend for the last few months. It's a small house, so I decided to move into a shelter for a while too. So and it's okay. You got to watch your stuff because there's people who steal.
Yeah.
But as long as you're careful about keeping your stuff locked up, it's not too bad.
All the shelters seem like they're full of headlights, and a lot of the buildings downtown are full of cockroaches and stuff.
And there are some nice SROs, but the ones that I've been offered aren't nice.
Oh, okay. So you're gonna hold out for a nicer one.
I'm trying to get something maybe out of the downtown area too.
There should be more subsidies for people, but the more subsidies there are, the less there seems to be for me. So the more the money they pour into giving to people, all they're doing is taking people that already have places and giving them better places, and then knocking down the places that they lived in. So there's never any for people that are already living outside.
You went to a shelter?
No,
I was always on the streets.
yep. No, I want a place of my own, but I don't want to be in an SRO or a shelter or any of that. I want at least a one bedroom or something like that.
Yes, shelters are often seen as the quickest answer to homelessness. But in Vancouver, the problem is that shelters do not always provide enough beds, enough safety, or enough stability. For many unhoused people, the shelter system has its own problems. Beds can be limited, rooms can be crowded, privacy is almost non-existent. Some people worry about theft, losing their belongings, being separated from loved ones, or sleeping in a space where they do not feel safe. Others say the conditions can be dirty, stressful, or too unstable to feel like a real step forward. And even when someone wants permanent housing, the path is rarely simple. Waiting lists for affordable and supportive housing can be extremely long. A person may wait months, or even years, without a real place to move into. For someone already living outside, that delay means more nights on the street and more uncertainty about whether help will ever arrive. This is why some people refuse shelters, even when beds are available. From the outside, it may look like they are refusing help. But for someone living through it, the choice is more complicated. A shelter bed may protect them from the weather, but it can also mean giving up control, privacy, safety, and the few belongings they still have. Shelters are not useless. They are still an important emergency response, but they cannot carry the whole crisis. A crowded room for one night does not make rent cheaper. It does not give people the stability they need to rebuild their lives. What many people need is not just a bed. They need a room, a door they can close, a place to keep their belongings, clean restrooms, and enough privacy to feel human again. That is why Vancouver needs more than temporary beds. The real need is deeply affordable housing, supportive housing, and stable rooms people can actually stay in. Because homelessness does not end when someone is moved indoors for one night. It ends when they finally have a safe, stable place to call home. Now, let's look deeper into Vancouver's homeless crisis and why this city needs more than temporary shelter to create real change. If you found this documentary meaningful, please like, comment, and subscribe to US Homeless Exposed for more real stories about homelessness and the systems behind it.
The current reality. In Vancouver, homelessness is not hidden far away from the city. It is visible in the same place where wealth, tourism, and modern development exist side by side. According to the 2025 Vancouver homeless count, the city recorded 2,715 people experiencing homelessness. That was a 12% increase from 2023. Out of that number, 763 people were unsheltered, meaning they were living outside, in vehicles, in makeshift structures, or in other places not meant for permanent living. Another 1,952 people were staying in shelters or temporary spaces. Across Greater Vancouver, the crisis is even larger. The 2025 regional count recorded more than 5,200 people experiencing homelessness. These numbers show that this is not a small problem limited to one block, one street, or one neighborhood. It is a regional housing crisis that has reached the sidewalk. But numbers only tell part of the story. In areas like downtown Eastside, the crisis becomes much harder to ignore. People carry their belongings in bags, carts, or backpacks. Some wait outside shelters and service centers. Some rest near storefronts, alleys, or public spaces. Others move through the city with no clear place to go next. For people living outside, every day becomes a test of survival. Finding food, a bathroom, a safe place to rest, clean clothes, or a dry place to stay can take hours. Privacy disappears. Stability disappears. Even basic routines become difficult when someone has no door to close behind them. And even for those counted as sheltered, life is not always stable. A shelter bed can help someone get through the night, but it is not the same as having a home. It may come with time limits, crowded conditions, strict rules, and the constant uncertainty of what happens next. There is also another layer that official counts may not fully capture: hidden homelessness. These are people sleeping on a friend's couch, staying in a motel for a few nights, living in a vehicle, or moving from place to place because they have no permanent address. They may not always appear in the public image of homelessness, but they are still part of the same crisis. This is why Vancouver's homelessness problem cannot be understood only by looking at tents or street corners. The visible crisis is only the surface. Underneath it is a larger system of people who are barely holding on. One missed payment, one lost job, or one broken support away from having nowhere to go. Vancouver is often described as one of the most livable cities in the world, but for thousands of people, the reality is very different. Livability means very little when the cost of staying alive in the city is higher than what people can afford. And that is the current reality of Vancouver's homeless crisis. A city of beauty and wealth, where thousands of people are still trying to survive without a stable place to live. Why this crisis happened. Vancouver's homeless crisis did not happen overnight. It grew over years of rising housing costs, limited affordable housing, low incomes, and support systems that could not keep up. Vancouver is one of the most expensive cities in Canada. For many people, rent is not just high, it is out of reach. A person working a low-wage job, living on disability assistance, or relying on social support can lose housing very quickly when rent rises or income falls. And once someone loses a place to live in a city this expensive, getting back in becomes extremely difficult. The deeper problem is the lack of truly affordable housing. Vancouver does not just need more homes. It needs homes that poor and vulnerable people can actually afford. When older rental buildings disappear, when cheap rooms become harder to find, and when low-cost housing is replaced by more expensive development, people at the bottom have fewer places to go. For many years, single-room occupancy hotels, known as SROs, were one of the last options for people with very low income. Many of these rooms are old and difficult to live in, but for some people, they are still the final step before the street. When that last step becomes unstable, homelessness grows. But housing is not the only factor. Many people living without stable housing are also dealing with mental health issues, addiction, trauma, illness, family breakdown, or long-term poverty. These problems often overlap. A person may lose housing because rent is too high, then struggle even more because life outside makes everything harder. Addiction is visible in parts of Vancouver, especially around downtown Eastside. But it would be too simple to say addiction alone caused this crisis. For some people, substance use came before homelessness. For others, it became worse after they were already living outside. The same is true for mental health. Without stable housing, treatment becomes harder. Without treatment, keeping housing becomes harder. And without both, People can get trapped in a cycle that is very difficult to escape. That is why Vancouver's crisis cannot be explained by one cause. It is not only about personal choices. It is not only about addiction. It is not only about mental health. And it is not only about housing. It is all of these pressures happening at the same time. A city can look rich from the outside, but still become impossible to survive in for people with the least money and the fewest protections. And when the cost of housing rises faster than the systems meant to protect people, the street becomes the place where those failures finally appear. Housing policy and social support. Vancouver is not ignoring homelessness completely. The city, together with BC Housing and community organizations, has created different programs to respond to the crisis. These include shelters, temporary modular housing, supportive housing, outreach services, and long-term housing projects for people experiencing or at risk of homelessness. One major part of the response is supportive housing. This is housing for people who need more than just a room. It often includes on-site staff, help connecting to healthcare, mental health services, substance use support, and other daily supports. BC Housing describes supportive housing as subsidized housing with support services for single adults, seniors, and people with disabilities who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. Vancouver is also working with BC Housing to create about 350 new permanent supportive homes on city-owned land. These homes are meant to provide safe, secure, and affordable housing for people who need long-term support. Temporary modular housing has also been used as a faster response. It was designed to help people move indoors while more permanent housing is being planned or built. For people living outside, this kind of housing can be a step away from the street and toward more stability. But the problem is the gap between what exists and what is needed. Shelters can help someone get through the night, but they are not the same as a home. Temporary housing can reduce pressure, but it does not solve a long-term housing shortage. Supportive housing can change lives, but only if there are enough units, enough staff, and enough services to meet the scale of the crisis. And right now, Vancouver is still behind the need. The city has thousands of people without stable housing, while new housing projects take years to plan, approve, fund, and build. Even when a program works, it can still be too small or too slow for the number of people waiting. This is where the weakness of the system becomes clear. Vancouver has programs. Vancouver has partnerships. Vancouver has shelters, outreach teams, and supportive housing plans. But the streets still show that the response has not been large enough to match the crisis. The issue is not only whether help exists. The real question is whether that help reaches people fast enough, deeply enough, and long enough to keep them from returning to homelessness. Until that gap closes, many people will keep moving between the street, shelters, temporary housing, and unstable rooms without ever reaching the permanent stability they need. What needs to change? If Vancouver wants to reduce homelessness in a real way, the city cannot rely only on shelters and emergency responses. Shelters are important. They can protect people for a night, especially during cold weather or extreme conditions. But a shelter bed is not a permanent solution. It does not give someone long-term stability, privacy, or a real place to rebuild their life. The first thing Vancouver needs is more truly affordable housing. Not just more expensive condos. Not just more market-rate rentals. The city needs housing that low-income workers, seniors, people on disability assistance, and people leaving homelessness can actually afford. Without that, many people will keep falling out of the housing market faster than the system can bring them back in. Permanent, supportive housing also needs to expand. Some people only need affordable rent to become stable again, but others need housing with support around them. Mental health care, addiction recovery services, caseworkers, healthcare access, and help with daily life. For these people, housing alone may not be enough. But without housing, every other service becomes harder to use. Vancouver also needs to protect and improve its lowest-cost housing. For many people, SROs and cheap rental rooms are the last step before homelessness. But if these places are unsafe, poorly maintained, or disappearing from the market, the city loses one of its final safety nets. Replacing or improving this housing should be part of the long-term solution, not an afterthought. Prevention is just as important as response. It is cheaper, more humane, and more effective to help someone before they lose housing than to wait until they are already living outside. Rent support, eviction prevention, emergency financial help, and better support for people leaving hospitals, treatment programs, or correctional facilities can stop homelessness before it begins. The city also needs stronger mental health and addiction recovery services. In places like downtown East Side, housing, addiction, trauma, and mental health are deeply connected. If people have to wait too long for treatment, or if services are too difficult to access, the crisis continues on the street. Recovery cannot happen only through short-term programs. It needs stability, trust, and long-term care. But the most important change is this. Vancouver has to stop treating homelessness as something that can be managed only after it becomes visible. Moving tents from one street to another does not solve homelessness. Clearing public spaces does not create housing. Emergency shelters do not replace permanent homes. A real solution has to deal with the root causes. Rent people cannot afford, housing that does not exist, health services that are stretched too thin, and a support system that often arrives too late. Vancouver does not need one simple answer. It needs a full system that prevents people from losing housing, helps people move indoors, and supports them long enough to stay there. Without that, the crisis will keep returning, no matter how many times the city tries to clean up what people can see. Personal view. What makes Vancouver's homeless crisis so difficult to ignore is the contrast. This is not a forgotten city, with no money, no development, and no public attention. Vancouver is wealthy, beautiful, and globally recognized. It has luxury condos, expensive neighborhoods, a strong image, and one of the most desirable landscapes in North America. But that image becomes harder to accept when thousands of people are still living without stable housing. A city can look successful from the outside and still fail the people who have the least protection. It can build higher towers, attract more investment, and promote itself as one of the most livable places in the world. But if low-income people cannot afford to stay, then that success is incomplete. Homelessness should not be treated as something that only needs to be moved out of sight. Clearing sidewalks may change how a street looks for a while. Moving people from one block to another may reduce pressure in one area. But if those people still have no permanent housing, no support, and no stable path forward, the crisis has not been solved. It has only been relocated. That is the uncomfortable truth Vancouver exposes. The problem is not only what people see in downtown East Side. The problem is the deeper system that allows a rich city to become unreachable for its poorest residents. This crisis is not just about poverty. It is about what happens when housing becomes too expensive, support arrives too late, and the people most in need are left to survive in public. And in a city as beautiful as Vancouver, that reality is impossible to separate from the image the city wants the world to see. The help coming from ordinary people. But in the middle of Vancouver's homeless crisis, not every response comes from the government. Across the city, ordinary people are still trying to help in the ways they can. Some bring hot meals to the street. Some hand out bottled water, socks, jackets, blankets, hygiene products, and clean clothes. Others volunteer with community kitchens, churches, outreach groups, shelters, and small nonprofit organizations. These actions may look small compared to the size of the crisis. A meal does not solve the housing shortage. A jacket does not lower the rent. A pair of socks does not create permanent supportive housing. But for someone living outside, these small things can still matter. They can mean getting through another cold night. They can mean having something clean to wear. They can mean being seen by another person instead of being ignored by the city around them. This kind of help also shows that many people in Vancouver understand something important. Homelessness is not just a public issue to be pushed away. It is a human issue happening right in front of them. But individual kindness has limits. Food, clothing, and street outreach can reduce suffering. They can help people survive the day. But they cannot replace housing, healthcare, addiction recovery, or long-term support. That is why charity matters. But it cannot carry the whole crisis by itself. If the system does not provide enough stable housing and real support, the burden keeps falling on volunteers, outreach workers, churches, nonprofits, and ordinary people trying to fill the gaps. Their help is important. Their compassion is real. But compassion should be a bridge to something better, not the only thing standing between people and the street. Conclusion. Vancouver's homeless crisis is not a problem that can be solved with one short-term response. It is the result of years of rising rent, limited affordable housing, poverty, health struggles, addiction, and support systems that have not been strong enough to stop people from falling into homelessness. The city has shelters. It has outreach teams. It has supportive housing projects and community organizations trying to help. Ordinary people also step in with food, clothing, blankets, and basic supplies. But the crisis is still visible. That means the response has not yet matched the size of the problem. A city cannot shelter its way out of homelessness forever. It cannot move people from one sidewalk to another and call that progress. It cannot rely on charity alone, while the cost of housing keeps pushing more people to the edge. If Vancouver wants real change, it has to deal with the roots of the crisis. Housing people can afford, long-term support, mental health care, addiction recovery, and prevention before people lose everything. Because homelessness is not just about who is sleeping outside tonight. It is about what kind of city allows that to continue. Vancouver is still one of the most beautiful cities in Canada, but beauty cannot hide a crisis forever. And until the people living on its streets have a real path back to stability, Vancouver's homeless crisis will remain one of the hardest truths beneath the city's perfect image. If you found this documentary meaningful, please like, comment, and subscribe to US Homeless Exposed for more real stories about homelessness and the systems behind it.